Mr. Minister, thank you so much again for your hospitality here and your time. And I would like to start with the latest and biggest probably news and developments that concern your region. Several days ago, NATO announced that it is considering this possibility of placing 4 rotational battalions in Poland and in Baltic states. And the final decision, I understand, will be done during the NATO summit. But I'm just wondering what your assessment of this intention at this point, and do you think that this is enough? This will provide enough NATO presence in your region on what they call eastern flank?
These announcements, yes, will be formulated into a proper policy. I do sincerely hope during the Warsaw Summit. There are still 2 months to go, May and June, and we take this, of course, very seriously. And we do not only welcome these news, but I think we have been working for at least a good part of the last year very intensely to convince our allies that what we call a new normal in our region is something that we need to react to, and react to also by providing more NATO presence. And in a run-up to the Warsaw Summit, we have 3 major goals, and one of them is indeed enhanced forward presence. We've been talking about the battalion-sized unit in each one of the 3 Baltic states, and as you correctly mentioned, also Poland has interest there. We're talking about pre-positioning, and we're also talking about making our Baltic region sort of a part of a longer-term NATO planning process. And one example that I'd like to share with you here is that we have this excellent air policing mission that is taking place out of 2 countries here, Lithuania and Estonia, MRE air base, but we approach it on annual basis. I know which countries will fill the slots this year, and we are negotiating about the next year. However, I think as we do not really see that the security situation is going, though the current sort of tensions are going to disappear anytime soon. So we should really look ahead and understand that we are in it for a long run, and I think we should also make sure that we are part of a longer planning process until the situation gets better.
You've been part of the North Atlantic Alliance for 12 years, I understand. There was an anniversary recently.
2004 joining, indeed.
So can you tell me about your experience of being part of NATO? Has it been positive all the way? And how do you feel about going forward with that? What your plans are?
Of course, I mean, when we regained our independence in the very early 90s, we had 2 very clear goals and objectives. One was to both were to firmly anchor ourselves in the sort of Western community. One was to join the EU, and the other to join NATO. There have been other important milestones, like joining the Eurozone or becoming part of the OECD, for example. But NATO is something that enjoys widespread societal support here, and in these current times, of course, we understand that besides our own national defense forces, which we're also working very systematically to develop and to advance, but we need to keep in mind that we are a small country, we'll always be a small country, that being members of the NATO alliance is a sort of one of the cornerstones of our security, which anchors us firmly in the Western world, as we have always felt we belong to.
And as you mentioned, being a small country, you're yet managing to fulfill your obligation of spending 2% of the budget to support military needs. And you're one of the few countries who actually does that. How difficult is it?
It's not difficult here. And to be honest, I mean, we had a debate, as in every other country, about the need to spend 2%. But I think events across the border in the East have made it a lot easier for us. So right now we have 3 parties in the coalition, 3 in the opposition, so 6 altogether in the parliament. And to be honest, there's no one calling for cutting the defense spending. And let me also add that we actually spend more than 2% on our defense as the host nation support expenses to host our allies here. We cover from on top of the 2%.
If we talk about rhetoric, you mentioned about the events in the East. There were two big things happened last week in Poland and in Romania. United States, in collaboration with these countries, started supporting or renewed their support for the missile defense shield. And the president of the Russian Federation, actually I need to give this quote, he said that the missile defense shield of the United States in Romania and Poland will be the threat for security in Russia and will shatter the security system in the European region. How can you assess that, and how can you assess the general rhetoric kind of surrounding this?
Of course, I disagree with the president of Russia on this issue. There is no better way of saying this. I mean, NATO is a defensive organization. The defense is conventional, missile defense or nuclear defense, and we firmly support this development, and I think certainly provides the sort of predictability and readiness, for facing any kind of threats or challenges. And also, if I could advise our good colleagues east of the border, then I mean, if the behavior was predictable, transparent, non-aggressive, of course, we would, be in a completely different security environment. You started this interview by asking about, the allies and enhanced allied forward presence here. I think, had things been different, we would be nowhere near talking about battalions or allied military units here. We need to react, and it's not improportionate. It's also, I think, important to stress. We're not returning to the sort of Cold War era, tank for tank, aircraft for aircraft, man for man. Let me remind everybody of your viewers that Estonia is a country of 1.3 million people. We have 3,300 or thereabouts professionals, plus we have conscripts, we have a reserve that at times of crisis we can call upon, which is 21,000 strong. We do not have fighter aircraft or combat navy. We don't have tanks. To talk about, that it is provocative or we're trying to provoke something, or we're entering sort of an arms race is, of course, not true.
Russian planes were intercepted by the UK air forces in the Baltic airspace. Do you think it is just a matter of unprofessionality, or it is a real provocation, and what would the reasons for that provocation be, if it is?
What we see across the Baltic Sea is, of course, very reckless behavior by Russia. I really regret to say this, that they fly their military formations between sort of St. Petersburg region or the rest of Russia and Kaliningrad with their transponders switched off. So they're blind to civilian radars, and to be honest, it is an accident waiting to happen. They clearly try to test and challenge us, and sometimes we have up to 5 different scrambles a day when Allied aircraft will fly to identify the Russian aircraft visually. It's very dangerous. It's clearly part of the pattern of sort of state policy, and when you talk about the harassment of the Navy ships in international waters, for me, it cannot be a pilot's decision to do that. It must be orders that are followed, and it's not only in the Baltic Sea that they do that. They do that in the Black Sea too, for example.
Air policing has been famous here, and today, this week, we saw the military ships, NATO battleships, in the harbor of Tallinn. And do you think this serve as this deterrence gesture, just to show that you're protected here?
Deterrence is the key here. As I said, we're not, we don't want to see this sort of Cold War era arms race in our region at all. It is about deterrence. It has to be politically credible and it has to be militarily credible, and this is it. Yes, there is Allied air presence here now in forms of the air policing mission. Sometimes we have Allied Navy vessels here, like now, taking part in exercises or visiting for other purposes. This is, and we have exercises that you have visited yourself down in the southeast of the country, where there are 10 Allied nations involved. So this is part of our routine activity to make sure that we practice together, we train together, we collaborate, we work together.
You mentioned Spring Storm exercise, and I understand it is the biggest exercise in the region this year, and I understand you participated there as well, spent a night with the battalion. We filmed there as well, and we saw a lot of international, obviously, troops there. You know, there were American troops, Dutch troops, Estonian conscripts, I understand. How do you assess the quality of collaboration? They talked a lot to us about the use of kind of, you know, getting to know each other and being able to collaborate and work together. What is your feeling about it?
Now, this is the 13th year that we are running this Spring Storm exercise. It is not the biggest exercise in our region. In Russia, there are exercises that are many times larger than that, of course, taking place. So for us, it's a sort of a final exam to our conscripts, which we then do every spring. This year we have no more than 6,000 troops involved, including, yes, from 10 allied countries. Last year we had, just to test our reserve system, we had the largest ever exercise with up to 14,000 participants. And I think, you know, when we are talking about the development of our own military here in this country, for us it's a very international project. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that NATO countries are involved, but also we have Finland this time involved in the exercise, which is great news, I think. We really share the, you know, same perception of threat, and we share an understanding what our security challenges are. So it's a great news. I expect that our colleagues from Sweden in the future will also join the exercise. And we have people also, I think one staff officer taking part from Ukraine, for example. So it is going a little bit beyond NATO, but, you know, like-minded countries have to work together.
In terms of like-minded countries that are not part of the alliance yet, but they're being encouraged, Scandinavian countries, what is your stand on that? Is there a real need? Would you participate in encouraging them to become part of NATO as well?
You ask a direct question, I can answer it directly, yes. But it is of course up to them to make these decisions, and it's their choice. Our collaboration or cooperation has been increasing year on year. Especially since Crimea, let me add, it is important to understand that like-minded countries have to work together when there are challenges or issues that we need to tackle. So we have seen real deepening of cooperation since those events.
If we talk about the attitude of the United States and the assessments that are being made there about the situation in the region, the latest RAND report, after conducting some simulation exercises, concluded that in 60 hours Russian troops can hypothetically end up in Riga or Tallinn. And I would like to ask you about not just this hypothetical scenario, but in general about the real threat of that. Do you think it exists?
Well, first I think it's important to underline that Estonia will defend itself no matter what, no matter against whom. Now everything else is speculation. I mean, there are all sorts of hypothetical, theoretical scenarios that we can think of. I think it is important that we have a clear message of deterrence, that we will defend, and it's NATO as a whole, not, you know, one country against the whole potential threat. I mean, this is what the organization is about, and I don't know now the details anymore about this report. I mean, it was published last winter, I think, but I think they didn't quite take into account all the different aspects of Estonian own defense forces, including, for example, the military voluntary organization called the Defense League, which alone has 25,000 members, so there were some aspects that they couldn't really read to entirely. But we're working closely with RAND, I think, and you know, I mean, it's great that these sort of reports are written, because to set the sort of tone before the Warsaw Summit, I mean, it's a welcome news, and I think these sort of things often make headlines, and once the headlines are made, then politicians have to react, and for us the reaction clearly I expect is to be positive.
What do you expect of the Warsaw Summit? What would the best outcomes for you be?
We have three objectives: enhanced forward presence, pre-positioning, and making our region part of a longer-term NATO planning process. My gut feeling, based on all sorts of informal contacts that inevitably take place in a run-up to these sort of events, is good. We have had positive signals from the US. I met Ashton Carter, the Secretary of Defense, just recently. I met my colleague from France just very recently. We've been in regular contact with the UK counterparts and Germans, and also Visegrad countries have made clear supporting statements. So I expect the countries of NATO, no matter where they are, to understand our concerns and to react positively.
In your dialogue with your partners lately, let's say, how often Article 5 is being mentioned or discussed?
Well, there are many articles. There's Article 3, which means that every country has to be responsible for their own defense, first and foremost. We actually live up to the pledge of the 2% defense spending that not all the countries in NATO do, so we take the whole thing very seriously. And I think Article 5 is sort of fundamental importance. I mean, it's attack against one means attack against all. It doesn't matter if it's Tallinn or Washington or London or Riga.
You mentioned about conscripts at some point, so I just wanted to hear from you about the whole system, how it works in your country, how efficient do you think it is?
Our country, with a population that is 1.3 million, has to take a sort of pragmatic approach to defense. We are not going professional. We didn't, while many other countries in the region did, and I think some of them at least have come to re-evaluate the sort of this decision now. I'm glad that we pursued a very principled line that, you know, our people are part of our defense system. It really has been working for us. We built up a reserve, which then every few years is called up to rehearse as part of the spring TOM exercise as well. We have our reservists there, so it is working for us, and I think there are a good number of countries which have come to take a second look at their choices. Lithuania is a good example. They reintroduced temporarily now the conscript-based approach for 5 years, I think. It's up to them, of course, to take future decisions, but I feel really that we've been sort of vindicated by not going professional, and for a small country such as ours, this is a model that is clearly working.
There were lots of discussions lately in the press about the situation with the drones, and I just, you know, read your comments to the Norwegian press about the fact that you're aware of that and you've been dealing with this problem. And there were also suggestions that the presence of the drones kind of implies that there might be special services from Russia working on the territory of your country. If you could just describe the whole situation, how you see it.
Well, I think facts and fiction have well been confused in those reports that you referred to. I'm from a little place on the island of Saaremaa myself, and a couple of weeks ago there was a Sunday fair. You know, people were selling shoes and candy floss and smoked fish, and amongst other things I saw a big display of drones with cameras. That is sort of a boot sale. So everyone these days has access to drones. So I can buy one, you can buy one, and our neighbors and friends can all have one, or more if they like. So I think a bit more has been made out of this issue than necessary. Of course, we take this sort of report seriously. We have government agencies that take responsibility and who look into these matters. I can assure you that there are no Russian special services operating in this country. So it is a bit, how shall I say, these remarks are rather scandalous and are not really substantiated.
Just a little bit more on how the discussions and assessments are about different scenarios happening here. And there were suggestions by some analysts that with the buildup of NATO presence here in the region on the eastern flank, Russia is just forced to be taking measures that would not have been taken otherwise, and this increases kind of this escalation and bringing it to the point of the possibility of direct confrontation. What would you say to that?
What we have followed over the period of recent years, unfortunately, especially since 2008 Georgia war, then Crimea, then Eastern Ukraine, a very clear pattern of behavior that, in my view, clearly contravenes with all the international norms and regulations that we respect. So to call it a provocation that we attempt to react to something like that is very unsubstantiated at minimum. We need to react because we want to make sure that Russia understands that we're going, no matter what, we're going to defend our territory, and it's not only the territory of Estonia, it's the territory of NATO. If you simply look at the facts, if we have an army that is 3,300 professionals, if I'm now not wrong, then I think in the Russian Western military district alone you have 350,000 troops, including every possible rocket and missile that you can think of in the arsenal of Russia, then I really don't see how we're going to provoke Russia. We are reacting to just to send a very clear message of deterrence.
And how do you feel about the buildup of Russian troops? Because there were latest announcements about, Kaliningrad, increased presence in Kaliningrad, and right along the border, pretty much of, on the eastern flank. So it's just pretty much NATO troops facing Russian troops. How do you assess this situation?
I think, even during the times of financial difficulty now in Russia, I see that they're happy to cut social spending or perhaps even pensions, not to touch the military. And this, while the whole of Europe was cutting their military expenditure. Remember post-crisis in 2000 and financial crisis in 2006, and also before that actually. Then all during that time, of course, we saw Russia seriously investing into military modernization, and especially, particularly in the Western region. So I think rather facts speak for themselves.
In terms of your collaboration with the United States, if we just talk about this bilateral connection, you mentioned you spoke to the Ministry of Defense of the United States, and US is part of NATO, obviously. But what is your experience of collaborating directly with America?
It is one of our closest allies when it comes to security. NATO as a whole, of course, is the alliance we are in. NATO, the US, is by far the biggest ally in all this, and I think I'm very glad to see the US leadership. The initiatives such as the ERI, European Reassurance Initiative, and the quadrupling of the funding of this, and I see this really as a welcome news and as providing leadership to many other members of the NATO, and I do hope also that the US leadership is not limited to that. I think we need to understand that that the defense spendings in quite a few of many of the NATO countries which are not up to scratch need to increase, and I think the US, Estonia and the US very closely share this idea that we need to invest more in our defense, and I hope they do take leadership. There is a
big discussion in the United States about the possibility of increasing military support to Ukraine at this point. Do you have any special position on that? Would you support this idea? Would you encourage the United States to do that?
We cooperate wherever we can with Ukraine, which of course is a much bigger country than Estonia is. So we try to offer them all the political support where we can. We want to offer our support if there are other areas, coming to advice and advising on some sort of issues. So of course I support very much the continuation of the reform, process in Ukraine. I think there are many challenges, and it's inappropriate for me, I think, to start commenting on specific relationship between the US and Ukraine. But I mean, of course, I encourage the Ukrainians to learn from wherever they can to make the reform process even more successful, even faster, and really comprehensive. And the US, I mean, I'm glad that the US is back in Europe and back also, you know, really seriously taking, you know, a look at the events and processes in Ukraine.
Talking about collaboration, do you expect in any foreseeable future that there might be some pattern of collaboration created with Russia on the issues that are kind of, you know, that pose general challenges to the region, such as terrorism, the situation in Syria, and things alike?
I think there was an attempt to convene the NATO-Russia Council recently. I think everybody agreed that they agreed to disagree about all the big things. However, yes, I mean, Russia has played, I think, a constructive part, for example, when it came to the Iranian nuclear issue. Really, I haven't seen that the sort of one-sided process undertaken by Russia or intervention in Syria has been helpful. I think it just permeates many of the problems that Syria is facing, including it encourages more people to flee the country, as you know, essentially Russia handed a sort of an oxygen mask to a dying regime, which would otherwise probably have collapsed. So, you know, there are many things that in my view are controversial there. But of course, I mean, if there are issues where we can agree and find common ground, I don't see why we shouldn't work together. Doesn't mean that we agree on all big things.
Your country is part of this big cyber movement, and Estonia is one of the most digitalized countries in the world at this point. How do you incorporate cyber in your defense strategy?
I think for us, I mean, when we also discussed the upcoming Warsaw Summit, it's important that we make cyber a separate domain of NATO workings. There is sea, land, air, and cyber should become a separate domain. We are strongly in favor of that, and I hope we can build consensus on that. Yes, I mean, in Estonia we have a saying that if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. In 2007, we were exposed to a full-blown state-to-state, state-on-state cyber attack. We came out of it much stronger. We survived this, so we have become, yes, stronger, and we have built a very good niche capability, I think, in this. And it's one of the areas where, you know, big, small is a bit more blurred. I think it depends on how smart you are. I think we are very good at this stuff, and it is one of the strengths that we are very famous for. And you know, many of the other NATO members really appreciate our experience and competence in all this, and it gives us a sort of an asymmetric say, I think, in you know, in NATO workings, and I think in many ways globally. And I think we can attract the NATO cyber range that is probably going to be built and decided at Warsaw Summit. You know, we can attract this to come here to Estonia.
Excellent, Mr. Minister. Thank you so much for your time. We wish you luck, and we hope to eventually talk about your successes in the near future.
Thank you very much.